Have you ever stared at the ceiling in the dark, praying with all your heart, and still heard nothing back? Have you ever walked into church feeling hollow, sang the songs, said the words, and wondered if God even noticed? Have you ever begged for a sign, just one little sign, and the heavens stayed closed? You're not alone. There are moments in the Christian journey when everything feels dry, when the Bible doesn't speak like it used to, when your prayers feel like they hit a wall, when everyone else seems to be thriving in faith, and you're just holding on, quietly, privately. Wondering if you've done something wrong, if God has moved on, if the silence means you're on your own. But what if the silence isn't punishment? What if the silence is sacred? For 30 days, I committed to praying every single day, no matter what. Not just on the good days, not just when I felt spiritual, but even when my heart was numb, even when I didn't want to, even when God felt a million miles away. And here's what I learned. Silence isn't empty. Silence is a canvas. Let me take you into one of those quiet mornings. Day 7. I got up early before the sun. I made coffee, sat in the same corner where I always pray, and I waited. I prayed a little, read a psalm, but mostly I waited. Nothing happened. No divine whisper, no sense of presence, just me and the hum of the fridge. I wanted to quit, but something inside whispered, keep showing up. So I did. Day 10, same routine. This time I didn't even pretend to feel holy. I told God straight up, I feel like you're not here. I'm praying, but I don't know why. I'm tired of guessing if you care. And even though I didn't hear him speak, I noticed something shift. Not outside me, but in me. I wasn't praying to get a result anymore. I was praying just to be with him, even if he was silent. That's when I began to realize we've trained ourselves to expect God to speak in fireworks. But most of the time he speaks in whispers, and sometimes he doesn't say anything, because he's teaching you to trust what he's already said. Think about it. If a parent always responds immediately, a child never learns patience. If a teacher always gives the answer, a student never wrestles with the truth. And if God always showed up with a visible sign, you'd never develop spiritual muscles. Silence isn't God abandoning you. Silence is God strengthening you. But let's be real, silence hurts. It feels personal. It feels confusing. It feels like rejection. So what do? First, be honest. Stop pretending. God already knows how you feel, so you might as well tell him. I began journaling my prayers, not fancy devotionals, just raw, real stuff. God, are you still there? I'm tired of feeling nothing. I want to feel you again. Those entries weren't pretty, but they were honest. And God can handle your honesty better than your silence. Second, stay consistent. The enemy loves to isolate you when you're discouraged. He whispers, why pray if nothing changes? That's when you need to press in the most. Praying through silence builds a kind of grit that shallow faith never knows. Third, reflect. Don't react. In the silence, God is doing deep work beneath the surface. It's like winter in the soul. On the outside, everything looks dead, but underground, roots are growing stronger. Faith is stretching. Maturity is forming. You can't shortcut that. Looking back on those 30 days, I realized something profound. My circumstances didn't change much, but I did. I became more anchored, less emotional, more grounded, less desperate for quick answers, more confident in God's character. I began to realize faith isn't the absence of doubt, it's continuing when doubt screams the loudest. And slowly, the silence became a space of peace, not because God finally said something, but because I stopped demanding that he had to. Sometimes the silence is the answer. Sometimes God is teaching you that he's enough, even without the feelings, the fireworks, the feedback. And in that space, something beautiful happens. You stop chasing experiences. You start cherishing presence. You realize that God is not a vending machine. He's a father, one who sometimes holds you in silence to teach you that his love is deeper than words. During week 3, something shifted again, not dramatically, but subtly. A verse in Romans hit differently. A worship song stirred something deeper. I started noticing the little signs, the peace that made no sense, the patience I didn't used to have, the joy that returned without explanation. It wasn't lightning, it was dew. Quiet, gentle, real. Here's the truth. When God feels silent, he might actually be the closest. Just like a teacher is silent during a test, not because they've left, but because they're watching you apply what you've already learned. Just like a parent watches their child stumble through their first steps, Not because they don't care, but because they know stumbling leads to strength. God's silence isn't abandonment, it's trust. He's trusting you to hold on, trusting you to remember, trusting you to believe that love is still present even when it's not loud. This isn't about ignoring the pain of silence, it's about transforming it. And if you're there right now, in that quiet place, that dry space, that season of not feeling anything, I want to say this: don't give up. Keep praying, keep showing up. Even if your prayers feel like pebbles thrown into the ocean, God sees every single one. Even if your worship feels hollow, He hears your heart behind it. Even if your faith feels microscopic, it's enough. Jesus said that even faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. He never said it would feel easy, but He promised it would be worth it. So maybe you've been asking, God, where are you? Maybe today the better question is, God, what are you teaching me in this silence? Because sometimes the quiet season becomes the place where you finally hear what matters most, not with your ears, but with your soul. And that's where we'll continue in part 2. But for now, stay the course. You're not walking through this alone. God is closer than you think, even in the silence. Tip tuk vefantu hibansan sang. There's a moment in every believer's life when you start asking the harder questions, not because you've lost faith, but because your faith is maturing. Questions like, if God is love, why does He feel distant? If He promised to never leave me, why can't I sense His presence? If I'm doing everything right, why does He feel so silent? And then there's the guilt. The voice in your head that whispers, maybe you're the problem, maybe you're not spiritual enough, maybe God's disappointed in you. That voice can wear you down, day after day, until you're too tired to try again. But here's something you need to hear. Your spiritual dryness does not disqualify you. God isn't waiting for you to perform. He's not silent because you failed. Sometimes He's silent because He's drawing you deeper. There's a kind of relationship with God that doesn't depend on emotional highs or mountaintop moments. It's quieter, stronger, rooted, and it only grows in silence. During the second week of praying through God's silence, I began to notice a shift in how I prayed. At first, I begged for answers. Then I started listening more. And then something surprising happened. I stopped needing God to explain Himself. I just wanted to be near Him. I remember one night I was sitting outside looking at the stars. No music, no Bible open, just the stillness. I whispered, God, I don't need you to speak. I just need to know you're here. And in that moment, not through words or signs, but through this strange, steady peace, I knew He was. That's the mystery of God's silence. It feels empty, but it's not. It's full of meaning if you're willing to wait. Most of us are trained to expect God to operate on our timelines. We want quick answers, immediate breakthroughs, emotional confirmations, but God works in seasons, not seconds. He forms hearts, not just fixes problems. And the silence? It's often where He does His most profound work. Look at the Bible. Joseph sat in prison for years, wondering if the dreams God gave him were dead. David wrote psalms in caves while running for his life, asking why God seemed so far. Even Jesus, hanging on the cross, cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" If the Son of God experienced divine silence, then your silence doesn't mean failure. It means you're walking a sacred path. One morning around day 15, I was journaling and wrote this line: maybe the silence is an invitation to stillness. That thought stuck with me. I realized I had been filling every moment of silence with noise, music, podcasts, opinions, content, distractions. But silence with God is different. It's not emptiness, it's space, a sacred space for transformation. When I finally leaned into that, things began to change. I noticed my prayers became simpler, less about performance, more about presence. I stopped listing all the things I wanted God to fix and just started sitting with Him. I even began thanking Him for the silence, for the space, for the stillness, because somehow it was healing me. That's the power of surrender. When you stop fighting the silence, it stops feeling like punishment. It starts to feel like invitation. I also started noticing the ways God was speaking, but not in the ways I expected. One day it was through a conversation with a friend who unknowingly said exactly what I needed to hear. Another day it was a verse I'd read dozens of times, but suddenly it jumped off the page. Other times it was nature, a sunrise that quieted my anxious mind, a bird that lingered longer than usual. God was speaking, just not in thunder, in whispers. But I never would have heard those whispers if I hadn't stayed long enough to quiet the noise inside me. That's what silence does. It strips away the distractions. It reveals what's really going on in your soul. It exposes your need, your pride, your fear, and then gently it begins to heal them. There's also something else I learned. God's silence often precedes new seasons. Think of it like the moments before dawn. The world is still dark, but light is coming. You just can't see it yet. Maybe that's where you are right now. You're praying, you're showing up, but everything still feels dark. I want to encourage you. The dawn is closer than you think. But here's the key. You can't microwave this process. You can't skip the silence and get straight to the light. God's work in you through the silence is what prepares you for what comes next. Without the silence, you miss the strength. Without the silence, you miss the roots. Without the silence, you miss the intimacy that can't be found in noise. During the last few days of that 30-day prayer journey, I looked back through my journal. I saw the raw entries, the frustration, the confusion, the desperate pleas, but I also saw the shift. Somewhere along the way, the pages turned from questions to trust. God, I trust you even when I don't hear you. God, I believe you're good even when I don't feel you. God, I choose to stay near even in the silence. That's real faith. That's where it gets personal. So if you're there, if you're walking through a season of God's silence, I want to offer you these truths. You are not forgotten. You are not broken. You are not a spiritual failure. You are being formed. Silence doesn't mean God is gone. It often means He's closer than ever, doing a deeper work than you can see. Stay in the Word, even when it feels dry. Keep praying, even if it feels empty. Show up, even if you don't feel inspired. This isn't about pretending, it's about pressing in. And eventually the silence begins to sing. It won't be loud, it won't always make sense, but it will be holy. Because God is still speaking, and He sees you. He's been there the whole time, not just watching, but walking with you. This is what grows in silence, roots that hold through storms. This is what develops, a heart that knows God, not just feels Him. This is what remains, a quiet confidence that no season, no silence can steal. Keep walking, keep praying, keep listening. Even here, even now, He is near. There's a strange kind of comfort in realizing that you're not the only one who's felt abandoned by God. When you read through the lives of the great men and women in Scripture, you discover they walked through the very same valleys. Confusion, silence, waiting. Moses spent decades in the desert before God spoke through a burning bush. Hannah prayed for years in sorrow before God gave her a son. And Elijah, after witnessing a mighty miracle, sat alone under a tree and begged God to take his life. These weren't weak people. They were faithful, but they still struggled with silence. One of the things I learned during my 30 days of praying through the silence is this: when God feels silent, He's not inactive. In fact, He's often working more deeply than we realize, reshaping our desires, refining our faith, and realigning our priorities. Silence isn't the absence of God. It's often His classroom. I remember around day 18 I hit a wall. Emotionally, spiritually, everything felt flat. No breakthrough, no sense of nearness. I was reading my Bible, but the words felt lifeless. I was praying, but it felt like talking to a ceiling. And I started asking again, why God? Why does it feel like you've left me here alone? But right in the middle of that thought, another one came, quiet and unexpected. What if this is the place I've brought you to grow? I didn't want that answer. Growth is hard. Growth is uncomfortable. Growth doesn't always feel like progress. It often feels like pain. But deep down, I knew it was true. God wasn't ignoring me. He was inviting me to trust Him beyond my feelings, inviting me to follow without signs, inviting me to love Him even when it's quiet. That's when I started to understand. God's silence is often His way of maturing our relationship. Because let's be honest, we're used to depending on how we feel spiritually. We equate God's presence with emotional highs, goosebumps during worship, or breakthrough moments. But those feelings, while beautiful, are not the foundation of real faith. They're a gift, not a guarantee. Real faith is built in the dark. It's easy to praise God when you feel Him, but can you praise Him when you don't? It's easy to obey when you're inspired, But can you obey when it's just discipline? It's easy to love when there's blessing, but can you love when there's silence? That's the test. And more importantly, that's the opportunity. Because on the other side of silence is a kind of relationship with God that isn't shaken by feelings or circumstances. It's rooted, secure, steady. In those days, I began to approach my prayer time differently. Instead of asking God to break the silence, I began thanking Him for sitting with me in it. I said things like, "God, I don't feel you today, but I believe you're here. So I'm going to sit here with you." That simple shift began to change everything. It wasn't about what I was getting from prayer. It was about who I was becoming through it. One morning I read Psalm 13, David's raw cry, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever?" That hit hard. But then, just a few verses later, David says, "But I trust in your unfailing love." No answer had come. No problem was fixed. But David chose to trust in the middle of the silence. That's what I began to do. Not perfectly, not always with joy, but I chose to stay. And here's what I discovered. God's presence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just is. Like oxygen, silent, invisible, but essential. You don't notice it every moment, but you need it for every breath. And once you learn to recognize it, not with your feelings, but with faith, it changes everything. Sometimes I'd just sit quietly, hands open, and say nothing at all. No agenda, no request, just a quiet, "Here I am, Lord." And though He didn't thunder from the heavens or flood me with emotion, something began to take root inside me, a calm assurance that I was not alone. That's the gift of persevering through God's silence. You become unshakable. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've walked with Him in the dark and discovered He is faithful. Around day 24, I wrote this in my journal. I don't need God to speak today. I just need to remember who He is. That simple sentence became an anchor. I remembered He's the same God who parted the sea, the same God who fed the hungry, the same God who raised the dead, the same God who carried me through seasons I didn't think I'd survive. That kind of remembering builds a faith that doesn't waver every time life gets quiet. By the final stretch of my 30-day journey, the silence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I wasn't performing. I wasn't chasing signs. I wasn't begging for answers. I was just learning to be with God. And that, I think, is the point. We spend so much time wanting to do things for God or to feel close to God that we forget the beauty of just being with Him. No pretense, no pressure, just presence. It's not easy. There were still days I struggled, still moments I wanted to quit, but every time I stayed, I discovered something deeper. Peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, joy that isn't tied to emotions, faith that stands when nothing else does. That kind of transformation doesn't come through noise, it comes through the silence. So if you're still in it, if your prayers feel unanswered and your heart feels dry, don't run, don't numb, don't fake it. Sit with God in the quiet, talk to Him honestly, wait for Him patiently, and believe, truly believe, that He's doing something in you that's bigger than what you can see, because He is. Even in the silence, He's still speaking. One evening, near the end of my 30-day prayer journey, I sat in my room with the lights off, the world quiet, no music, no distractions, just me and the question I couldn't shake. Is this what faith really looks like? Not the mountaintop moments, not the passionate worship, just this, stillness, surrender, silence. It wasn't dramatic, but it was deeply real. And that's something we don't talk about enough. We want stories with big endings, with obvious breakthroughs. But sometimes the greatest victories come in moments no one else sees, when you choose to stay faithful, even when God feels silent. That night I started to understand something that changed the way I viewed everything. Silence from God doesn't mean absence. It might actually mean invitation. An invitation to go deeper. An invitation to trust more. An invitation to stop depending on signs and start walking by faith. You see, God's silence isn't punishment, it's preparation. In the wilderness, Jesus fasted for 40 days and heard nothing but temptation. No angel choirs, no comforting whispers, just hunger and testing. But it was there that His strength was forged, and when He left the wilderness, He walked in power. Sometimes God allows silence because He's forming something inside you that noise could never shape: resilience, maturity, clarity. The silence tests your motives. It strips away performance. It exposes whether you want God for who he is or just for what he gives. That realization hit me hard. How often had I used prayer like a vending machine? Insert faith, get answers. Insert worship, get blessing. But what if prayer is less about what we say and more about where we stay? In the silence, I started to learn how to stay. Not stay busy, not stay distracted. Remain present, still, listening, even when I didn't hear anything. Some days I'd sit for 15 minutes and feel absolutely nothing. Other days a verse would flash into my mind like a spark in the dark. But most of the time it was ordinary, quiet, unremarkable. And yet looking back, those quiet minutes became sacred ground. Because even though I didn't feel God showing up, I was learning how to show up for him. Consistently, authentically, humbly. That's the kind of relationship that lasts. That's the kind of faith that endures. Think about a marriage. If it only thrives on date nights, emotional highs, or grand gestures, it won't survive. It's the everyday choosing, the shared silence, the faithful presence. That's what makes love grow deep. The same is true with God. The days I kept praying, even when my heart felt hollow, became the days that shaped my character the most. They taught me what it means to worship with my life, not just with my lips. Because real devotion isn't proven in moments of clarity, it's revealed in moments of silence. And over time, something unexpected began to happen. I started to feel lighter. Not because circumstances changed, not because the silence broke, but because I was no longer afraid of it. I stopped needing constant affirmation. I stopped fearing the quiet. I stopped equating God's love with how emotionally connected I felt that day. Instead, I started resting in his promises. One morning while journaling, I wrote, "God, even if you don't speak today, I know you've already spoken, and what you've said still stands." That kind of confidence doesn't come from feelings, it comes from truth. So I clung to the truth I already knew, that God never leaves me, even when I feel alone, that his word is alive, even when it feels distant, that his grace is working, even when I can't see it. When you pray every day for 30 days through silence, you begin to separate your faith from your emotions. You stop needing spiritual highs to validate your relationship with God. You begin walking with him not as a guest, but as a child who knows they belong, even when the house is quiet. Somewhere around day 27, I realized my prayers had changed. They weren't longer or fancier, they were actually simpler. God, thank you for today. Be near. Lord, I don't have much to say, but I'm here. Father, I trust you, even when I don't understand. These weren't desperate cries, they were declarations of trust. And slowly the silence started to feel less like rejection and more like refinement. Like God was pruning parts of me I didn't even know needed to be trimmed. My need for constant answers, my addiction to emotional validation, my pride in being spiritually strong. He was replacing those things with something better: stillness, patience, endurance. I can't say I had a dramatic moment where God spoke audibly or a vision appeared. That didn't happen. But I can say this: I left that 30-day journey knowing God better than I ever had before. Not because he shouted, but because I finally slowed down enough to listen to the silence and trust that he was still with me. There's a strange kind of joy that grows when you stop demanding signs and start delighting in presence. One day I came across Isaiah 30:15, "In quietness and trust is your strength." That verse sank into my soul. Quietness and trust, not striving, not anxiety, not panic. Quietness, that's the hidden strength of those who keep praying when God feels silent. They're building a spiritual core that doesn't collapse when storms come. And storms will come. There will be days you lose the job, feel the loneliness, face the diagnosis, or weep over the loss. But if you've learned to trust God in silence, you'll find that he holds you steady even then. Faith like that isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just stands. That's the kind of faith I want to keep growing. The kind that isn't shaken by silence. The kind that doesn't give up when answers are delayed. The kind that prays, even if you don't speak, I'll still follow. As I neared the end of my 30 days, I didn't want it to be over. Not because the silence was easy, but because it had become holy. Not because I got what I asked for, but because I became someone different. Not because God changed, but because I did. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that silence breaks, but that it shapes. You might still be in the quiet season, you might still be wondering why God hasn't spoken, but don't despise it. Don't rush it. Don't fear it. Because what feels like silence might be the sound of God doing his deepest work in you. Stay in it. Stay faithful. Keep praying. Keep showing up. You're not alone. Even when it's quiet, God is present. And in that presence, there's peace. Something shifted after that 30-day journey. Not in my circumstances, but in how I responded to them. I stopped seeing silence as a dead end. I started seeing it as a doorway to a deeper kind of relationship with God, one not based on constant reassurance, but steady presence. Not built on feelings, but on trust. Not driven by what I could hear, but by what I already knew to be true. I began to understand that faith isn't just believing God can speak, it's believing he's still good, even when he doesn't. And that realization didn't just impact my prayer life, it changed the way I lived. I used to think that hearing from God would be this dramatic, unmistakable moment, like a bolt of lightning or a voice from the clouds. But sometimes it's subtler than that. Sometimes it's a quiet knowing, a gentle shift in your heart, a word of scripture that suddenly feels like it was written just for you. That's what started happening more and more. I would wake up and instead of immediately asking God, "Are you going to speak today?" I found myself saying, "God, thank you that you're already here." That small shift changed everything. Because when you stop chasing signs and start trusting his nearness, your faith becomes rooted, grounded, calm. And in a world full of chaos, that kind of peace is rare and powerful. It reminded me of the story in 1 Kings 19 when the prophet Elijah was desperate to hear from God. He stood on a mountain waiting for a word. First came a powerful wind, then an earthquake, then fire. But God wasn't in any of those. And then finally came a gentle whisper. That's where God was, not in the noise, not in the spectacle, in the stillness. That whisper is what sustained Elijah, and it's what sustains us too, if we'll slow down enough to hear it. But here's the truth. The whisper doesn't always come on day 1, or even day 30. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it comes in pieces, sometimes it comes after the silence has done its work. And that's okay. Because in the waiting, God is building something in you that lasts. He's teaching you how to worship in the dark, how to pray without proof, how to hold on when everything in you wants to let go. And in that process, something beautiful begins to form. Resilience. Resilience isn't loud or flashy, it's quiet faithfulness. It's waking up and praying anyway. It's showing up when you feel empty. It's choosing to believe that God is still writing your story, even when the page feels blank. That kind of faith can't be faked. It's forged in silence. One day, around the middle of the second month after my prayer challenge, I was having coffee with a friend. He asked me how it went. "Did you hear from God? Did anything amazing happen?" I paused and I told him the truth. No fireworks, no visions, but I found peace, I found trust, I found God. Not in the way I expected, but in a way I now wouldn't trade for anything. He looked surprised. "That's it?" And I smiled. Because to the outside world it might not sound impressive, but if you've ever walked through silence and come out with peace, you know that's everything. Because when the world gets loud again, and it will, you need something deeper than surface-level faith. You need an anchor. And for me, that anchor became the still, silent presence of God I met when I kept praying anyway. That's why I want to tell you this. If God feels silent right now, don't give up. He's not ignoring you. He's inviting you. And maybe, just maybe, he's teaching you how to hear him in a new way. Not in the earthquake or the fire, but in the stillness. What if silence isn't the absence of God's voice, but the soft space where it becomes clearest? What if the reason you feel nothing is because he's teaching you to walk by faith, not by sight? And what if this quiet season is preparing you for something bigger than you can imagine? I've found that when God is preparing to do something significant, he often goes quiet first, like a seed beneath the soil, unseen, but not inactive, silent, but growing. So don't let the silence discourage you, let it shape you. Keep showing up, keep opening your Bible, keep whispering those small, honest prayers, even if all you can say is, "God, I'm here." Say it. Because that small act of faith might be the spark that starts a deeper fire. Sometimes the breakthrough doesn't come with a shout. Sometimes it comes in a whisper, long after you thought the conversation was over. And when it does, it doesn't just give you answers, it gives you intimacy. That's the gift of silence. It draws you close, not just to God's voice, but to his heart. I don't want you to miss that. Because in a world chasing noise and quick fixes, choosing stillness is a radical act of trust. And it's in that place of trust that your faith becomes unshakable. It's not a faith built on feelings. It's a faith built on truth. And truth doesn't change with emotion, it stands. The truth is, God is with you. The truth is, he sees you. The truth is, he's working even now. So if you're in a silent season, you're not being punished. You're being prepared. Lean into it. Don't run from it. Let it form something deeper in you than noise ever could. Because silence isn't empty, it's full of what God is building. And when the time is right, you'll see it. You'll look back and realize that every quiet morning, every unanswered prayer, every ordinary moment was holy. Because in them God was shaping your soul, not with fireworks, but with firelight. Not with thunder, but with truth. Not with signs, but with stillness. And in the stillness you'll discover something more powerful than a dramatic moment. You'll find a God who never left. So don't stop now. You're closer than you think. If you've stayed with me through this journey, then perhaps you understand what silence from God really feels like. Maybe you're not just curious, you're living it. You've prayed, you've waited, and it seems like heaven is quiet. But now you know. Silence isn't a sign that God has left. It's an invitation to lean closer. This journey isn't about reaching some grand conclusion. It's about learning to walk differently, more slowly, more intentionally, more aware that even the quiet holds meaning. And something beautiful happens when you walk with God in the silence. Your ears get sharper, your heart gets softer. You stop rushing to fix everything and start resting in the one who holds everything. That's where transformation happens. Not in the noise, but in the pause. You start to realize that faith isn't built in the moments when everything feels right. It's built in the moments when nothing makes sense and you choose to stay anyway. You choose to believe anyway. You choose to pray anyway. You begin to see that God's silence is often his way of drawing you to maturity, not to test you, but to teach you. Not to frustrate you, but to form you. Because he wants something deeper for you than emotional highs. He wants a rooted, enduring relationship. There were mornings when I still felt nothing, no warmth, no revelation, just stillness. But I got up and prayed anyway. And over time I started to realize God was listening, even when I couldn't feel it, especially then. My prayers weren't bouncing off the ceiling, they were planting something under the surface, and little by little that soil began to break. Sprouts of hope, of resilience, of peace I didn't have before. The truth is, when God feels silent, he may actually be more active in your life than ever, just not in ways that are immediately visible. Sometimes God is rearranging your heart. Sometimes he's healing wounds you didn't know you had. Sometimes he's preparing answers that require time, timing, and surrender. And sometimes he's waiting for you to stop trying so hard to hear him and simply start trusting that he's there. I'll never forget this one morning. I had slept terribly, was running late, and honestly didn't feel like praying, but something nudged me to pause, even for just a few moments. I sat on the floor, no music, no journal, no agenda, and I just whispered, "I'm still here." No lightning bolt, no miraculous vision, but peace came, gentle, subtle, like the breeze after a storm. And I understood in that moment, maybe that's all God was waiting for. Not a perfect prayer, but presence. Not polished words, but willingness. That moment taught me more about faith than 1,000 sermons. Faith is staying when you don't feel like it. Faith is holding on when your hands are tired. Faith is whispering, "I believe," when doubt is louder than hope. And it's in those exact moments, when your strength is gone, when your emotions are dry, when you feel like giving up, that you're actually growing the most. Because you're not being driven by feelings. You're being anchored by truth. That kind of faith changes how you live. It changes how you love others, because you know what it's like to need grace in the silence. It changes how you wait, because you understand that silence isn't delay, it's development. And it changes how you walk with God, because you're no longer chasing highs, you're walking in humility. You become someone who prays with depth, not just passion. You become someone who listens, not just speaks. You become someone who doesn't just seek miracles, but seeks the miracle worker himself. And that kind of life? It's magnetic. People will notice the peace in your eyes, the strength in your silence, the calm in your chaos, and they'll ask how. How do you keep going when it feels like God isn't answering? And you'll tell them, because I learned that God's silence doesn't mean he's absent. It means he's near in a different way. You'll point them to the one who doesn't always shout, but always shows up. And your story, your silent season, will become someone else's lifeline. That's why this journey matters. It's not just about you. It's about the person who's one quiet morning away from giving up. It's about the friend who's convinced their prayers don't matter. It's about the generation that's been taught faith means feeling something all the time. You have the chance to show them something different, something deeper, a faith that lasts. And maybe that's the point. Maybe God's silence isn't just about forming you, it's about preparing you to carry hope for others. So don't waste this season. Don't rush through it. Let it shape you. Let it anchor you. Let it teach you the kind of faith that doesn't need constant noise to stay strong. Because when the silence finally lifts, and it will, you'll come out different. You'll come out steadier, wiser, closer to God than you ever imagined. And you'll realize something powerful, that the silence didn't break you, it built you. So if you're walking through a quiet valley right now, keep walking, keep praying, keep trusting. God isn't gone. He's just teaching you how to walk without a crutch, how to stand without sight, how to love without proof. And that kind of faith, that's where the real miracles begin. If this journey has stirred something in your heart, if you're longing to experience that kind of quiet peace, that unshakable trust, that nearness to God, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Think Fresh Daily and come with us as we dive deeper into the life of faith God is inviting you to live. There's more ahead, more grace, more hope, more clarity, even in silence. Stay with us, stay anchored, and above all, stay prayerful. Your quiet miracle might be closer than you think.